Endocrinology, working in the National Institute of Diabetes and Endocrinology, Dow University of Health Sciences. First of all, I'm thankful to everyone for joining us today on Sunday. And then I request Dr. Hassan to formally start the program with Tilawat-e-Quran. Over to you, Dr. Hassan.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب نارا ذات مالة الحطب في جيدها حبل من مسد. शुरू अल्लाह के नाम से जो निहायत रहमान और रहीम है। टूट गए अबू लहब के हाथ और नामुराद हो गया वो, उसका माल और जो कुछ उसने कमाया वो उसके किसी काम ना आया। जरूर वो शोला जन आग में डाला जाएगा और उसके साथ उसकी जोरू भी लगाई बुझाई करने वाली, उसकी गर्दन में मून सी रस्सी होगी। सदक़ल्लाहुल अज़ीम।
Jazakallah, Dr. Hassan. I'm thankful to all the panelists who are the faculty members of my institute, especially my director, Professor Dr. Akhtar Ali Baloch, who initiated the idea of doing this course. And this course is basically for the 3 months duration, and it is based on a lecture which has to happen on Sundays. Each lecture has a credit hours. We have total of 13 lectures, and there are 13 CME credit hours. So if you, all the attendees who wish to earn the course certificate must register for every lecture, and likewise need to be registered for earning the credit hours. Now, I also want to thank Barrett Hodgson, whose support has made this course a possibility. And now I'm going to introduce today's speaker, who is not only a renowned endocrinologist all over the country. He is my supervisor. He's my teacher as well. Professor Dr. Najmul Islam does not really need a detailed introduction. We all know him very well. He's a professor of medicine and consultant endocrinologist in the Department of Medicine, Aga Khan University Hospital. He did graduation from Dow Medical College, and then he did his postgraduate training from UK. He has been a former president of Pakistan Endocrine Society. He also has been a former dean and convener of the subject of endocrinology in the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Pakistan. He has many research papers in the index journals in the national and international journals. And I welcome you, sir, and I thank you so much for sparing your precious time on Sunday for us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Zarina, for the introduction and for inviting me for this talk on the subject of acromegaly.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I am going to run the pre-poll question as per the format of our course. I can see there are 17 attendees so far, but I'm sure they will join us more. But because of, in order to avoid the waste of time, I'm going to run the pre-poll. So I'm going to read out each question one by one, as all of you will be able to, opt for your answer. Then we will be able to understand how many participants have opted for it. So question number 1 is, I'm going to read it in almost 3 to 5 minutes. Question number 1 is a 31-year-old woman with acromegaly who underwent transphenyl surgery and then initiated on the somatostatin analog. After 3 to 4 months, her growth hormone is 0.7 nanogram per ml, and IGF-1 level is 1.4 times the upper limit of normal range. How should the screening for colonic malignancies happen in this case? Option 1 is no screening required. Option B is first colonoscopy at age 50 years and then every 5 years and thereafter. Option C is at diagnosis and then every 5 years thereafter, irrespective of the control of growth hormone and IGF-1 level. And then option 4 is at diagnosis and then every 5 years until the growth hormone and IGF-1 levels are controlled. Now I'm going to move on to the next question. I hope all the attendees are participating in the question polls. Please opt for your answers so that we can review this after the lecture. Question number 2 is regarding the treatment recommendations for acromegaly. All of the following options are correct except one. So option 1 is it is recommended that acromegaly medical therapy, that is long-acting somatostatin receptor ligands, should be continued throughout pregnancy. For most patients, surgical removal of the pituitary gland tumor should be considered the primary treatment. Number 3 is an imaging study should be performed at least 12 weeks post-surgery to determine whether any residual tumor tissue is present. Number 4 is medical therapy should be administered only to patients with persistent post-operative disease. So I can see one of the participants has opted for option number 1. Anyways, we will see more activities, inshallah. So question number 3 is which age group does acromegaly most commonly affect? Number 1 is 25 to 40 years. Number 2 is 10 to 25 years. Number 3 is 30 to 50 years. And number 4 is 55 to 70 years. Question number 4 is a 46-year-old woman with growth hormone secreting adenoma with persistent disease fails to show growth hormone suppression with octreotide. This is one of the first generation somatostatin receptor ligands that has to be used. Pasireotide is then initiated, but she develops diabetes mellitus as a result. So which of the following is the best drug to control her sugars in this case? Option 1 is sulfonylurea. Option 2 is metformin. Option 3 is GLP-1 receptor agonist. And option D is insulin. Question number 5. Which of the statement about acromegaly is not true? So you have to opt out which one is wrong. Number 1 is excess growth hormone production from the pituitary gland as a result of adenoma is the most common cause. It remains undiagnosed for up to 10 years on an average. The diagnostic test of choice is an oral glucose tolerance test with growth hormone suppression. And number 4, last option is the end organ manifestation, example as arthropathy, cranial nerve palsies, or uncontrolled diabetes contribute to increased mortality. So most of the participants have now completed the poll, I think. You see 22% participate, people have actually participated. Okay, we are gaining numbers. So, okay. I will wait for another half minute, that is 30 seconds, and then I'll close the poll so that we can start the lecture. Still 44% have participated. Please answer the question so that you can learn more at the end of the lecture. Okay. So we have last few seconds. And that's it. That's the end of the poll. I'm not sharing the results so that we can repeat it after the lecture. Now, I will request Professor Dr. Najmul Islam to kindly share your screen and sir, you can start with the lecture. Over to you.
Sharing. Everybody can see my slides?
Yes, sir, we can see the slides.
So I'll make a beginning then. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm going to give a presentation on acromegaly, and I'll be ready to answer questions at the end of the presentation. My presentation is going to be under these headings: pathophysiology, etiology, clinical features, biochemical and radiological diagnosis, treatment goals and options, prognosis and management algorithm. Okay, so I hope everybody, all of you are aware of the control of growth hormone secretion from the anterior pituitary. It is under the control of two hormones. One is a stimulatory hormone, which is a growth hormone releasing hormone released from the hypothalamus. The other one is somatostatin, which really suppresses the production of growth hormone from the pituitary gland. So, and then growth hormone stimulates the production of IGF in the liver and in the peripheral tissues as well. This is how a growth hormone pulsatility of growth hormone is occurring in a normal person. You can see that during the day, growth hormone is released in small quantities and the pulses are very small. But while asleep during the night, there's a big pulses which is happening throughout the night till the morning, and the levels reach up to 20 microinternational units per liter. So this is a normal phenomenon of growth hormone secretion that's happening in each and every one of us. And this is what's happening in acromegaly. There are two, if you look at this graph, there are two parts. One is the lower part in blue, where the levels are not very high, but there is hardly much of a movement in terms of growth hormone levels. So some of the patients with acromegaly follow this pattern. The others follow the upper pattern, the green one, in which the levels are higher and there is lot of really pulsatility going on. The secretions are really going up and down throughout the 24 hours, and there is no diurnal or nocturnal difference. They are more or less the same throughout the 24 hours. So that's a growth hormone secretion in acromegaly as against the previous slide of growth hormone secretion in a normal person. What is the etiology of growth hormone? Excess growth hormone production, the etiology of acromegaly, I beg your pardon, excess growth hormone and the somatotroph adenoma is responsible for 95% of the cases, and most of it is sporadic in nature. A small percentage of this somatotroph adenoma is familial, is a part of MEN1, McCune-Albright syndrome, and sometimes familial isolated acromegaly, excess production of growth hormone. So these are type 3 varieties of familial, and then extra pituitary, which is responsible for less than 15% of the cases of acromegaly. It could be a somatotroph carcinoma, ectopic growth hormone production, maybe in the islet cell carcinoma. This is all excess growth hormone. Then you can have an excess growth hormone releasing hormone production as well. And again, this is responsible for less than 1% of the cases. Gangliocytoma in the hypothalamus, or it could be an ectopic GHRH production elsewhere in the body, which is responsible for 2%. Islet cell carcinoma, bronchial and intestinal carcinoids, and small cell lung carcinoma. So these are rare conditions, but you need to know and how really it leads to acromegaly. One is the direct production of growth hormone, and one is an indirect production of growth hormone via excessive production of growth hormone releasing hormone. I'm going to leave this, and then the somatotroph adenoma have this GSP characteristics. It's a gene mutation, and if they are GSP positive, 40% of them are GSP positive and 60% is GSP negative. And you can see the difference in the characteristics of these tumors. The production of growth hormone is much higher in GSP negative. GHRH response is there in much more as compared to GSP positive tumors. And again, further on, things have been listed here. There are micro adenomas, 36% of GSP positive, as against 16% macro adenomas in GSP negative somatotroph adenomas. So let's go on to the clinical features of growth hormone nexus. It could be neurological clinical feature, cardiovascular, metabolic, skin and connective tissue disease, musculoskeletal, or gigantism. So local tumor effects to begin with. What happens if a tumor in the somatotroph adenoma in the anterior pituitary becomes a macroadenoma? It leads to suppression or destruction of the normal anterior pituitary, causing hypopituitarism. It could lead to supracellular extension with optic chiasmal compression, causing bitemporal hemianopia. Compression of the pituitary stalk and posterior pituitary, causing diabetes insipidus, and erosion into the sphenoidal sinus downwards, an elevation of the diaphragm ocelli, which is the diaphragm between the pituitary fossa and rest of the brain. So these are the local tumor effects, the mass effect. This is bitemporal hemianopia, that is because of chiasmal compression. And then this is a tumor which is shown here, that this tumor is a macroadenoma. It is going into both the cavernous sinus, but not touching the chiasma. This slide is not very well shown here, but what it is showing is that the pituitary fossa in a lateral skull X-ray is very much enlarged in size. Then we have visual field loss, which we have shown that headaches, greater than 50% of the patients with acromegaly have headaches. What is the cause for it? It's maybe tumor related due to dural stretch. It may persist after cure. So remember, not all headaches will be cured after the acromegaly has been cured. You can have entrapment neuropathy like carpal tunnel syndrome. You can have peripheral neuropathy, and you can have a myopathy as well. Then hyperprolactinemia can be seen in up to 40%. About 20% or 30% is because of a post-secretion of prolactin from the tumor, and then the rest of it is because of the compression of the stalk. It leads to amenorrhea and impotence in male, about 50 to 75%. Goiter, which is most of acromegaly, and TSH deficiency and ACTH deficiency is preceded by the gonadotropin deficiency, is the mass effect of the tumor on the anterior pituitary gland. It has effect on the cardiovascular system as well. Hypertension. More than 50% of the patients with acromegaly have hypertension. It leads to septal and ventricular hypertrophy, cardiomegaly, and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy related to acromegaly has been recognized. Respiratory system is also affected. There is threefold increase in the respiratory death. Upper and small airway narrowing is seen. Obstructive sleep apnea is seen in about 30% of the patients with acromegaly, and they are at an increased anesthetic risk if they go for any surgery under general anesthesia. I don't know where this line is coming from, but again, this is something which has happened, and I cannot do anything to remove it. Yeah, जा सकता है अभी ये जो आगे line पता नहीं कहाँ से. अगर नहीं जा सकती तो ठीक है. नहीं है अभी इसके तो नहीं होगी. Asha, well, I think you have to bear with this line which has suddenly come. I don't know how. Clinical features: metabolic, insulin resistance, manifesting as impaired glucose tolerance or diabetes mellitus, seen in up to 30% of the patients with acromegaly. hypercalciuria, raised 125 vitamin D, and hypertriglyceridemia in about 30% of the patients. So these are metabolic things that happen. Skin thickening and increased sweating, hyperhidrosis. Bone changes like thickened extremities, prognathism and malocclusion of the jaw, enlargement of the sinuses, arthralgia, accelerated osteoarthritis, and increased risk of colonic malignancy. About up to 5% reports have been there of increased risk of colonic malignancy, plus adenomas, pre-malignant adenomas in the colon. And most of these are located before the splenic flexure, proximally. So this is how a hand of an acromegaly looks like. You must have all seen it. This is macroglossia, big tongue. This is forced facial feature, which is shown here. This is prognathism, where the jaw is protruding outwards. This is again showing various features in a slide of an acromegalic person. This is malocclusion, plus the spaces between the teeth is increased, interdental spaces. And if we look into the various studies, looking at the prevalence of signs and symptoms of acromegaly, this is one of the articles published by Izzet et al. In Medicine, and this is in, I think it is 1994. It's an old one, where they have seen that depression is seen in less than 30, including other features listed below, and 30 to 60% have headache, erectile dysfunction, arthritis, asthenia, peripheral neuropathy, paresthesia. There's a lot of spelling mistakes, but I copied it from the article, so I cannot change it. Majority of these patients had acral growth, deformity of facial features, soft tissue swelling, and increased sweating. So in this series, majority had these 4 symptoms. And another way to look at it was another publication in the JCAM in 2003, and it shows that the different features of acromegaly at diagnosis, and this was averaged from reported series in the literature. And you can see that acral growth and forced facial person. And then less than that is hyperhidrosis, which is sweating, menstrual disturbances in females. Headache in this series is from 37 to 87%, arthritis in 30 to 45%, carpal tunnel syndrome in 25 to 50%, diabetes in 10 to 70% approximately, erectile dysfunction and decreased libido in 12 to 46, hypertension in 17 to 51%, visual field defects, sleep apnea, galactorrhea, and coronary artery disease. So this is in this series published in 2003. And this is another series, an old one, in 1992. They again looked at various symptoms and this frequency in among 310 patients with acromegaly. And again, a small series in 2016, where 64 patients were looked into, and these symptoms in men and women were really compared. And there are certain things which are more common in females as compared to males. For example, if you look at headache, they are almost equal on both sides. Diabetes is equal on both sides. But if you look at changes in appearance or acral growth was much more in females as compared to male in this series, but it's a small series. Hyperhidrosis, increased sweating, was more in females. So these are differences in male and female, but again, you cannot make much out of it because it's a small series of 64 patients only. So once you know what exactly acromegaly presents like, you need to know how to proceed further in terms of clinical assessment. Confirm biochemical diagnosis. Then this is followed by P3 imaging, and then you look for local complications, and then also look for systemic complications as a result of acromegaly or the tumor from which the acromegaly has resulted. The tumor classification, you are very familiar with it. Microadenoma is the tumor less than 10, and macroadenoma is greater than 10. Macroadenoma with supercell extension and invasive macroadenoma with lateral extension. These are different extension of a macroadenoma. But majority of the acromegaly patients present with macroadenoma, because there is an average delay of 8.5 years since the onset of this diagnosis and since the onset of this disease and the diagnosis of this disease. So a delay of 8.5 years happens in various series have shown this. Biochemical diagnosis, the first test that is recommended by all societies is IGF-1. And some people also do IGF-BP3, but that's not a standard. Then the endocrine society said that if the levels are straightforward, then you don't need to proceed further. But if the results are equivocal, then you go for glucose tolerance test with either a 75-gram glucose or 100-gram glucose. And you take this sample for growth hormone at 30, 60, 90, and 120 minutes. And the growth hormone should fail to suppress to less than one nanogram per deciliter if you are using the immunoradiometric assay. And if you're using the normal assays that is available in most places, the cutoff is 2. The paradoxical rise in growth hormone happens in about 15 to 20% of the patients, where instead of suppressing, the growth hormone goes up, and this small percentage of patients, 15 to 20%. So this is how biochemical diagnosis is made. Once you have made a biochemical diagnosis, then you need to proceed further. You need to ask for an MRI, because 95% of the acromegaly is because of a somatotraph adenoma. The MRI of the pituitary gland is ordered. You need to order visual field testing to see if the patient has visual field defects. Despite that, on clinical examination, the patient may not be having visual field defects. Even then, you should be going for visual field testing in the form of perimetry. And you need to look at other hormones of the pituitary gland which may be deficient. For example, FT4-TSH. FT4 levels would be low if its hypothyroidism is there. ATM cortisol. Prolactin, as I told you, that 20% may be because of co-secretion of prolactin or because of a stock effect, or 10% or so. Testosterone, FSH and LH in male, and estradiol, FSH and LH in female. So these are the hormones of the anterior pituitary and is end hormones really in patients to assess the hypopituitarism. So once we have made a diagnosis of acromegaly, we'll go on to treatment. And before we go on to treatment, we should know what our treatment goals are. The biochemical treatment goals are that we would like the serum IGF to normalize after the treatment that we have offered to a patient. And if we are doing an OGTT, suppression of growth hormone to less than 1, if you're using immunoradiometric assay, otherwise less than 2. Random growth hormone, if you do that, if it is less than 1, that is also very helpful in showing that the acromegaly, as I have told you, that the 2 patterns that you see in acromegaly of the growth hormone production, one where the levels are slightly raised of around 5 or so, that will also be picked up, and if the levels have been very high, that also will show that if it is less than 1, the patient has been cured. So we are aiming for a cure of acromegaly in our patients whom we have made a diagnosis of acromegaly. There are certain features which are reversible and certain features which are irreversible. The reversible features are soft tissue hypertrophy, the sweating, and diabetes. Sometimes reversible is hypertension. Irreversible is the musculoskeletal or bony changes that is not reversible. And preventable is a question mark whether by treating that you will reduce the chances of ischemic heart disease and excess mortality, because the studies have not shown that the mortality has been reduced by treating growth hormone excess production in acromegaly, but it is expected that the mortality will be reduced. The first treatment option, surgery, it was first done in 1980, just a minute, there's some error here. The transesophageal surgery is in 1983, transfrontal in 1907, and 1909, the transnasal transfrontal was done by Cushing. So Cushing was the first person on whose name the Cushing syndrome has been, the diagnosis of Cushing syndrome is really made. Was the first person, surgeon, pituitary surgeon who did the surgery in 1909. Radiotherapy was first done on patients with acromegaly in 1909 and by the gentleman by the name of Gramegna. The medical therapy was the first one in 1974, the dopamine receptor agonist bromocriptine, and later on the cabergoline came, not in 1974. In 1988, the somatostatin analog, the octreotide, which we give 3 times a day, was introduced. And then in 1998, the long-acting somatostatin analog, the sandostatin LAR, the lanreotide, and the pasireotide. Pasireotide has been a recent addition. But the long-acting somatostatin analog, sandostatin, was the first one to be marketed in 1998. The growth hormone receptor antagonist, pegistomant, was FDA approved in 2003. So this is how the medical treatments have evolved over the years in the treatment of acromegaly. And you all know this very well, the transmural approach for pituitary tumors, and the same applies in acromegaly. Remission rate. In microadenomas, the remission rate is high, 80 to 85%. In macroadenomas, it is 65%. And this is in the best of the centers we are talking about. Invasive tumors up to 60%. Overall, if you combine micro and macro, in 70%, ranging from 45 to 80% depending upon the center. The relapse means after cure, the disease comes back, is about 0 to 15%. Relapse is unlikely if the OGTT growth hormone is less than 2. Poor prognostic features for cure is invasive tumor, high growth hormone levels more than 30, and tumor size. If a bigger tumor, the chances of cure is much less. As you all know, that surgery is the first line treatment, and transplant surgery is the way to go. In certain cases, you may go for transplant. The immediate complication is seen CSF leak in about 1%. Hemorrhage in the operative area is 0.3 to 1.2%. Meningitis less than 1%. Overall, these side effects are seen in less than 7%. So it's a pretty safe surgery. The mortality of transplant surgery is 0.5 to 1%. More likely with transfrontal. Long-term complications, that is hypopituitarism, after a surgery is about in 5 to 18%. Less likely with small tumors. Diabetes insipidus in about 1 to 3%, which may be temporary or permanent. The transient DI is in seen up to 20%, much higher than. So most of this is temporary in the hospital settings or soon after the hospital discharge, and most of it recovers. Permanent DI is seen in only 1 to 3% for transplant surgery, acromegaly. Surgery in acromegaly treatment failures. you can go for reoperation. If there is a subscribed residual tumor, remission after a reoperation is much less. Remission rate is 30%, and more complications is likely to happen in a reoperation. Or you may go for radiotherapy, slow onset, shrinkage, and growth hormone decrease. So it does not work immediately. Or you can go for medical therapy, which is bromocriptine, octreotide, bromocriptine and क्या कहते हैं, cabergoline. Tumor shrinkage with this is bromocriptine or cabergoline is there, but not significant. With octreotide, it is about modest reduction in the tumor size. Surgery sometimes is not a very common practice to pre-treat the patient with octreotide before surgery. It has been studied with some beneficial effects. For example, remission of symptoms in 50%, suppression of growth hormone in 100%, obviously with octreotide that we are giving to the patient. Growth hormone less than 5 microunits per liter in 70%, tumor shrinkage in 55%, softer tumor consistency, remission rates probably increased, no effect on invasive tumors. The duration that has been in studies is about 3 to 4 months prior to surgery. But as I told you, this is not the standard of care. Certain centers may offer this to the patients, but it's not a universal practice to pre-treat them with octreotide prior to surgery. Then we have radiotherapy. If the cure is not happen in your patient, then there are two options for you. The guidelines talk about giving medical treatment and as a second line option. But in Pakistan, we have problems with that because medical treatment is very costly. Particularly this Sandostatin is about 70,000 rupees a month. And if your patient is receiving 30 milligram dose, it will be about 1 lakh rupees a month. So it's not a cost effective way of treating, managing this disease in this low income countries. So here in Pakistan and in the third world, we offer our patients radiotherapy after they have had surgery and they have not been cured. And because the radiotherapy takes time to work, we offer them medical treatment in the interim period. So with that background, let me tell you that radiotherapy in acromegaly, the techniques we have conventional, in which up to 4,680 rads in 25 fractions over 35 days, which is a conventional. This is outdated now in most centers. Low dose was the practice done in Manchester, where they used to give 2,000 rads, 8 fractions over 11 days. Now it's a day of stereotactic radiotherapy. It could be proton beam, gamma knife, cyber knife. And then the last thing that I mentioned, the interstitial irradiation, yttrium-90 implantation, this is also now not very much in practice. So if our patients are not cured, we offer them stereotactic radiotherapy if the facility is available. And if it is not available, we offer them conventional radiotherapy. In Karachi, we have cyber knife in the public sector, and we have recently gamma knife also in the University of Health Sciences. I was reading in the newspaper. And there's also gamma knife in private sector in one place in Karachi. So we have stereotactic radiotherapy available, and it is also called stereotactic radiosurgery. The results: exponential decline in growth hormone levels, 50% fall in 2 years, 75% fall in 5 years, and sometimes it may take up to 10 years for the acromegaly or the radiotherapy to drop the growth hormone levels in the normal range. Conventional less than, if you look in a different way, growth hormone less than 10 nanogram, 80% at 10 years, 60% of less than 5 at 10 years. So it's a slow process. And the stereotactic radiotherapy works faster, but it is again not very fast either. It takes few years for the growth hormone to reach the level, the desired levels that we want, and up to 5 years as well. And there are not much series available. If you search the literature giving us the numbers for stereotactic, how long does it take to bring the growth hormone levels down? Factors influencing the outcome of this radiotherapy: the initial basal growth hormone. The level higher, the lesser the response would be. The tumor size, the bigger the tumor size, the lesser the response is likely to be. It is independent of previous surgery. Newer modalities, as I told you, stereotactic have better target dose conformation, an earlier drop in growth hormone and IGF-1 levels, but still not very early. Hypopituitarism with radiotherapy is seen in about 50% at 10 years. So you need to monitor anti-pituitary function in patients who have received radiotherapy at least yearly basis. The first to go is the gonadotropes, followed by ACTH, followed by TSH. And more likely this hypopituitarism to occur if they had had previous surgery. Other possible complications of radiotherapy are visual impairment, and that is why the tumor has to be away from the chiasma. And if it is too close to the chiasma, because the dose is high in the stereotactic, they tend not to give stereotactic radiation to those sort of cases, and they prefer conventional because it is broken into fractions. Brain necrosis is a very rare side effect. Deterioration in intellectual function, very rare side effect. Radiation-induced malignancy, again very rare. But these are plausible complications or possible complications. Now, the third modality of treatment, which is second line in the Western world and third line in this part of the world, and we have three agents. The first that I would like to discuss is the somatostatin analog, which is the first line treatment to be offered to your patient if they are not cured. It is most extensively studied and used somatostatin analog is the octreotide. Suppresses growth hormone levels to less than 2.5 in 65% and normalizes IGF-1 levels in 70%. So it has a good effect, but not reaching 90 or 100% at all. Tumor shrinkage is modest and seen in about 20 to 25% of the cases with somatostatin analog. Long-acting formulations, which are the ones that we use, have demonstrated consistent growth hormone and IGF-1 suppression. So it's not that it works initially and then later on they don't work. It is a consistent effect that is seen with these somatostatin analogs. Then we have dopamine receptor agonists. Prolactin levels are adequately suppressed. If they are co-secretors, the prolactin will come down nicely. However, growth hormone and IGF-1 level rarely normalize. Less than 20% achieve levels less than 5 of nanograms per ml and less than 10% achieve normal IGF levels. This is of growth hormone, less than 5. Tumor shrinkage occurs in few patients, and about 10%, 5 to 10% figure have been quoted. Dopamine receptor agonists are generally used as an adjuvant medical treatment for growth hormone access, along with sandostatin LAR or somatostatin analog, other ones. Cabergoline is somewhat more effective than bromocriptine. So we prefer cabergoline if we are using the dopamine receptor agonist in patients with acromegaly not cured. Growth hormone receptor antagonist. Pegvisomant have demonstrated effective suppression of IGF-1 levels up to 90%, have no direct anti-proliferative effects on pituitary adenomas. Normalization of IGF level occurs in about 90% of the cases of acromegaly. And if you measure growth hormone, the growth hormone levels will remain high. In fact, it may be higher than before the start of the pegvisomant treatment. Patients of pegvisomant monotherapy requires regular pituitary imaging to monitor possible increase in tumor size. And the local side effects, sometimes you can have lipohypertrophy affecting the liver functions, and local rashes can be seen with pegvisomant. Pegvisomant is even costlier than Sandostatin LAR, and pegvisomant is not available in Pakistan. If you look at this bromocriptine and octreotide differences, symptomatic improvement is much more in octreotides compared to bromocriptine. Growth hormone levels less than 5 is achieved in less than 20% with bromocriptine and about 30-40% with the dose that has been quoted in this study. IGF normalized in 10% and 40 to 80% with octreotide. Tumor shrinkage in less than 30% and less than 50% tumor shrinkage with octreotide. Octreotide therapy indications. When should we use it? Preoperatively in selected patients. As I told you, it's not a standard of practice at the moment across the world. As an adjunct to radiotherapy in this part of the world, where we offer radiation and the radiation takes time, and we can offer them octreotide therapy as an adjunct to radiotherapy. First line in patients whom surgery is contraindicated. There are certain patients with acromegaly, and they decide not to go for surgery, and you can offer them octreotide, which has to be a long-term treatment. In fact, at some stage in the late 90s, there was some experts recommending that we should be using medical treatment as first-line therapy. But again, that idea was not really accepted by most experts across the world, and is no more a first-line treatment in this time. Option in surgical failure. Surgical failure, then therapy in elderly with choose, but the chances of choosing that person in this part of the world is very small. If you give them octreotide, the headaches improves in about 80% of the cases, more than 80%. Possibly it has some intrinsic analgesic effect as well. Sweating decreases sleep apnea, somnolence, and sleep quality improves. Oxygen desaturation index is reduced. Octreotide therapy effects on cardiac dysfunction. There has been studies, the number of studies is very limited. Rapid reduction and improvement in cardiac failure, normalization of BP as I told in 50%, decreased stroke volume, has improved, and normalization in terms of effect on the heart. Gallstones in up to 30% of the patients may be resolved by using usually transient. Steatorrhea responds to pancreatic enzyme supplements, and gastritis is also been reported. It has some effect on deterioration of the diabetes control as well, but the effect is very marginal. to really mention here. A retrospective study on 79 patients, overall mortality increased in outcome of treatment. Mortality ratio was 2.64 in patients of acromegaly who were treated with octreotide. Normalized growth hormone, those who had a normalized growth hormone, there was no increased mortality, no apparent influence of diabetes or hypertension on mortality, but 57% of the deaths were vascular. Therefore, growth hormone normalization is a clinical priority. Benefits are another study of 151 patients, mean age at diagnosis of 41 years, duration of symptoms 7 years, poor prognosis, older was shown to be seen in patients with older age at diagnosis, duration of symptoms in which there was a longer duration of symptoms at diagnosis, high growth hormone at follow-ups. Things which are disease and hypertension, life expectancy average shortened is by 10 years in patients with acromegaly. And then coming to the end of my talk, I'm just giving you the algorithm. Biochemical confirmation of acromegaly with IGF-1 plus minus OGTT with growth hormone estimation. And then if the biochemical diagnosis of excess growth hormone is there, you go for imaging.
Talk regarding a very important endocrine topic, that is acromegaly. We do have few questions here. One of the attendee has a question about that how to diagnose pseudoacromegaly.
Pseudoacromegaly का term use होता है when the clinical features are there, but there is no excessive IGF-1 and there is no tumor. So that patient has got a pseudoacromegaly. Pseudoacromegaly तो उसको कहते हैं appearance wise सारा आपको acromegalic features मिलते हैं, लेकिन biochemically भी आपको वो कोई मतलब IGF-1 रेज नहीं है, ग्रोथ हार्मोन रेज नहीं है, और कोई वहाँ पे MRI में कोई ट्यूमर भी नहीं, तो pseudoacromegaly कहते हैं. तो उसको डायग्नोसिस तो ये है कि you have to investigate them as a case of acromegaly, and once you don't find any biochemical features to suggest excessive production of growth hormone, then that patient has got pseudoacromegaly.
Okay, sir. Another attendee has asked that what are the preferable modalities to treat diabetes in acromegaly?
देखिए, preferred method, insulin resistance increase हो जाता है. So, I mean, obviously you can use all the drugs, but आपको पता है कि the pathophysiology of diabetes is increased insulin resistance. So you are going to use insulin sensitizers as a first line treatment. But you can use other drugs as well.
Okay, sir. There are a few important more questions coming up. So somebody has asked that if there are many surgical surgeries going on for acromegaly, but still we get recurrence. So do we don't have neurosurgical techniques which are not good? Maybe they are.
देखिए, क्योर रेट जो है हमारे यहाँ शायद वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज का जो क्योर रेट है वो अचीव नहीं होता. The reason is expertise, and everybody is doing pitch surgery. Every neurosurgeon is doing pitch surgery. So ये जब ये स्टाइल होगा तो फिर ये क्योर रेट्स बहुत कम हो जाएंगे. It has to be dedicated pituitary surgeon who does pituitary surgery on a regular, and in each institution there should be 1 or 2 person dedicated to do pituitary surgeries rather than every neurosurgeon doing pituitary surgery. ये problem है इस third world के अंदर where the cure rate is not happening. And obviously with experience you get the expertise. We do have treatment modalities जो है वो जो surgical ट्रीटमेंट के लिए चाहिए चीज़ें वो सब अवेलेबल है यहाँ पे। माइक्रो सर्जरी भी है, एंडोस्कोपिक सर्जरी भी होती है, सब कुछ है। इसके प्रॉब्लम्स नहीं है। प्रॉब्लम ये है कि दे आर नॉट वेरी मच एक्सपीरियंस फॉर पिछली सर्जन्स इन द कंट्री, और एंड एवरीबडी इज डूइंग surgery, pituitary surgery, rather than dedicated people only. So this is the reason of a low cure rate of acromegaly in this part of the world.
Agreed, sir, बिल्कुल। एक और क्वेश्चन किया है कि ऑक्ट्रो स्कैन कब होना चाहिए? व्हेन शुड वी हैव एन ऑक्ट्रो स्कैन इन एक्रोमेगाली?
देखिए, ऑक्ट्रो स्कैन रेगुलरली तो हम इस पे नहीं करते, वी डोंट डू दैट ऑक्ट्रो स्कैन इन रेगुलरली। आपको अगर कोई सिनेरियो पूछे तो बताएं, मैं आपको आंसर करूं, लेकिन ये कि टोटली वी डोंट यूज ऑक्ट्रो स्कैन इन पेशेंट्स विद एक्रोमेगाली। आप देखना चाहते हैं कि फिर रिस्पॉन्ड करेगा या नहीं करेगा, तो वो तो आप एक्टियोटाइड देंगे तो पता चल जाएगा कि भाई वो रिस्पॉन्ड करेगा या नहीं करेगा विद द ड्रॉप इन द ग्रोथ हार्मोन लेवल्स एंड IGF-1। सो रूटीनली तो ऑक्ट्रो स्कैन नहीं रिकमेंडेड है।
So basically, the question they are asking, if the imaging technique, that is MRI, does not show an adenoma, then what should be the next imaging technique?
वो फिर अलग
for
बात
that,
है। वो उसके लिए फर्स्ट इज CT स्कैन। यहाँ पे आप न्यूरोएंडोक्राइन ट्यूमर को पिकअप करने की बात कर रहे हैं, तो न्यूरोएंडोक्राइन ट्यूमर को पिकअप करने के लिए पहले आप CT स्कैन करेंगे, और CT स्कैन में नहीं होगा तो यू कैन डू एन ऑक्ट्रोटाइड स्कैन।
and then there is a question, so we should use only cabergoline and bromocriptine in pregnancy for acromegaly, or just follow up?
We should not use it, neither of them, unless and until the patient has symptoms. The recommendation ये है कि आप मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट बंद कर देंगे unless के there is a big tumor which is likely to grow, और उसमें फिर अलग बात है, that has to be individualized decision. General recommendation ये है कि you should stop the medical treatment as soon as the conception happens, or if it's a planned pregnancy, to stop it beforehand.
Sir, Dr. Hassan, Dr. Hassan, are you there? You can, I mean, directly ask the question which you have typed in the chat box.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah for a very nice lecture. I have one patient. She's about 55, 56 years old woman, and she has been having acromegaly diagnosed about 3 years ago, and she was actually referred from other center. I review her MRI. There is no, amazingly, there is no adenoma in the pituitary, and then her IGF-1 was very high. I also did her imaging whole body CT scan that to just localize the ectopic source, and her IGF-1 was controlled on sandostatin because there was no localization of any tumor. So I just started on sandostatin, and she has also diabetes about a few years ago diagnosed, and this is controlled with the insulin aspart, biphasic insulin aspart. So whenever her IGF is controlled, her insulin dose goes down, and she also feels better. Her bogginess and her swelling or her facial appearances also there are some improvement. But should I continue with sandostatin, because as you mentioned earlier, there's a very costly treatment, and it is too in her case as well. So since we don't have any localized tumor, what should we do? I mean, should we continue with sandostatin?
देखिए, सबसे पहले तो ये कि आपने MRI ब्रेन तो कर लिया होगा, हाइपोथैलेमस में कोई ट्यूमर नजर नहीं आया होगा।
No,
फिर आपने स्कैन होल बॉडी किया, उसमें भी आपको कोई ट्यूमर नहीं पिकअप हुआ। आपने ऐसे केस में ऑक्ट्रोटाइड स्कैन किया, मेक श्योर कि कोई बहुत ही स्मॉल न्यूरोएंडोक्राइन ट्यूमर हो जो कि प्रोड्यूस कर रहा हो ग्रोथ हार्मोन या ग्रोथ हार्मोन रिलीजिंग हार्मोन।
Octreotide scan, that I think I should do that. Yes.
हाँ, दूसरा ये था कि आपके केस के अंदर बायोकेमिकली IGF-1 बढ़ा हुआ है या ग्रोथ हार्मोन भी बढ़ा हुआ है?
IGF-1 is raised.
और ग्रोथ हार्मोन का क्या, वो भी रेज्ड होगा?
Yes. Because I did her one of the moment I did her glucose tolerance test for growth hormone suppression, that was not suppressed.
ठीक है।
As I remember, I don't remember the value because she did not show me up for a very long time since the pandemic started.
ठीक है, देखिए उसका चूंकि ट्यूमर लोकलाइज नहीं हुआ है तो आप उसको क्योर तो नहीं कर सकते, लेकिन उसको मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट तो ऑफर होना चाहिए, because it has got increased IGF-1 and all the manifestation of increased IGF-1. तो मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट तो होगा, डिपेंडिंग अपॉन अफोर्डेबिलिटी आप उसको अगर अफोर्ड करती है तो सैंडोस्टैटिन LAR ऑफर करें, दैट इज द फर्स्ट लाइन ट्रीटमेंट। नहीं अफोर्ड कर सकती है तो आप उसको कैबरगोलिन ऑफर करें, which is not as effective
Okay.
as sandostatin LR, but she has to be offered treatment because you have not
Okay.
been able to locate the tumor and you cannot cure it.
Okay, sir. So first, I think we should do a ultrasound.
हाँ, ऑक्सीटाइड स्कैन करें, देखें कोई ऐसा ट्यूमर तो नहीं है जो कि पिकअप होता है उसके अंदर, और अगर वो पिकअप हो
Okay.
जाता है then you can remove the, you can ask the surgeon to remove that tumor and that will cure the problem. और जब तक नहीं पता चलता उस वक्त तक आप उसको सैंडोस्टैटिन
Perfect.
LAR या कैबरगोलिन
ठीक है,
दें।
बहुत शुक्रिया, थैंक यू सर।
So I think I'll end up the question answer session now and just quickly run the poll, post lecture poll for the participants to know what they had learned. Again, I'm not going to read the questions again. I'm launching the post lecture poll. Hope everyone can see. Encourage all the attendees to kindly participate once again in the polling so they can revise what they have learned so far. And so I'll just allow the lecture poll to be there for 1 minute because you've already gone through these questions once. So it's easier for you to just opt for the answers as quickly as possible. So people have started opting out. Okay. We'll wait for another 30 seconds. Meanwhile, I also want all the attendees to kindly give us your feedback through the feedback form. Nasir Saab, kindly share the link of the feedback form with all the attendees in the chat box or in the email. I hope the question is visible to all because some people have said that it is not visible. Because the people are participating, that means it is visible. Okay. I'll wait for another half minute and then I'll just end the poll. And then we have to discuss the answers as well. So I think I'm now going to end the question poll. Almost 50% of the participants have participated in opting the questions, attempting the questions. This is the end now. I'm going to share the results. So results are being shared now. Let's start with the question number 1. Here, the correct answer is actually option number D. That is at diagnosis and then every 5 years until growth hormone and IGF-1 levels are controlled. And 29% have got it corrected. For question number 2, regarding treatment recommendations for acromegaly and which one is actually wrong. So the correct answer here is option number A. It is recommended that acromegaly medical therapy, that is long-acting SRL, should be continued throughout pregnancy. So you've just learned from the lecture, and sir has also quite discussed it in detail in the end of this lecture that we don't give any treatment. In fact, people have asked about cabergoline and bromocriptine, and that is also not supposed to be given. So let's move on to question number 3. The correct answer is right, option number C, and 57% have opted correctly. Going on to question number 4. Here, 62% have opted for option number B, but the correct answer is actually option number C. GLP-1 receptor agonist has a good effect on, treating diabetes for those who have received peziriotide and developed diabetes likewise. Sir, would you like to give any comments regarding this? Because this was something new.
ये actually Pasirio-Tat के मुतालिक था. That was this
जी,
was the difference from the other
जी,
question that was asked to me was uh, how do you
वो तो
treat
डायबिटीज
diabetes?
का था.
हाँ,
जी,
उसमें तो मेटफॉर्मिन सही था. अब इसके अंदर Pasirio-Tat के अंदर probably the studies आपने जैसे देखा है. I was not aware of this answer myself. So
जी.
but again, if this
तो
is
इसमें दो
the
आंसर्स, जी, दो ऑप्शंस होते हैं. बेस्ट जो है वो तो इंसुलिन है ही, लेकिन अपार्ट फ्रॉम इंसुलिन GLP-1 रिसेप्टर एगोनिस्ट का रोल है इसमें. पीपल रिसीविंग पेजिरोटाइड, बिकॉज जो इंसुलिन रिस्पॉन्स आता है GLP-1 के हवाले से, वो यहाँ पे बूस्ट किया जा सकता है इन द प्रेजेंस ऑफ पेजिरोटाइड. So that was it. And the last question is question number 5 again. Here the correct answer is option number D. The end organ manifestation which are mentioned here, that is arthropathy, cranial nerve, uncontrolled diabetes, these are not reason for increased mortality. So that's why this is not true, but the rest of the statements are correct. So that is the end of the post-lecture polling, and I've already talked about feedback form, and because of the shortage of time, we have almost completed our the whole program. I'll just take quick comments from our director, that is Professor Dr. Akhtar Ali Baloch. Sir, kindly give your comments and remarks so that we can end the lecture then, end the program. I think sir has already left, or maybe his internet connection is not correct, as he has already mentioned कि वो internet connection में problem हो जाती है. With that, I would say thank you once again to our respected Professor Dr. Najmul Islam for giving his precious time on Sunday to our course, to contribute in our course. Thank you very much, sir, for your time and for your nice lecture. We hope to communicate, coordinate with you, collaborate with you again in future such academic activities. And thank you so much once again. And I thank all the participants. I think Professor Akhtar is back. Can you hear us? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
जी, वालेकुम अस्सलाम sir. Sir, kindly give your comments so we can end the program.
Assalamu alaikum.
जी, वालेकुम अस्सलाम.
Assalamu alaikum.
Sir, we can hear
To
you.
everyone once again, and I think yes. Assalamu alaikum to everyone once again, and I think we have a very wonderful session today. We have a wonderful teaching session today, and I am really grateful to Professor Najmul Islam for his very nice, excellent, and elaborate talk. About the management of the acromegaly. We do see the patient in our clinical practices in our outpatient department, and I'm very thankful to Bayer Hersons for supporting us to organize this teaching course. And I also especially thankful to my faculty, especially Dr. Zareen, for taking pain and organizing wonderful teachers on every day Sunday, and we are having a wonderful sessions with them. So thank you, Zareen. And I once again request all the participants, please do fill in the feedback form so we can make this course more fruitful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, sir, Dr. Najam. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you again in our future academic activities. Thank you, everyone, and stay blessed. See you next week. We have another lecture by Professor Dr. Saeed Meher, and see you next week. Allah Hafiz.
Office.
Allah Hafiz, sir.